The volcanic rocks crunched under David's boots as he checked the thermal readings near the lava pools. He had walked this path dozens of times in the past 3 months, always finding the same data, always recording the same temperatures. The research outpost needed these surveys, even if they were boring. Something glinted between 2 black stones ahead. David stopped and pulled out his scanner. The readings showed biological heat, which was strange because most creatures avoided the hot zones. He moved closer and found a round object the size of a basketball, covered in dark red scales that seemed to shimmer. An egg. A dragon egg. David had seen pictures in the Tesserine databases, but never expected to find one this close to the human outpost. The egg sat alone in a small depression, no parent in sight. He knew dragon mothers never left their eggs unless something was very wrong. The egg cracked. David froze. He should have backed away immediately. Protocol said to observe from a distance and call the science team. But the crack widened and a small sound came from inside, something between a squeak and a chirp that a tiny snout pushed through the shell. Then a head emerged, crimson red with golden eyes that blinked against the bright sunlight. The hatchling was barely bigger than his hand, with wings folded against its body like wet paper. Those golden eyes locked onto David's face. The dragon pulled itself free from the shell and tumbled onto the warm rocks. It stood on wobbly legs, opened its mouth, and made that chirping sound again. David remained perfectly still. The hatchling took 3 unsteady steps toward him. "No," David said quietly. "I'm not your mother. You need to stay here and wait." The hatchling tilted its head at the sound of his voice. It chirped again and took another step. David backed away slowly. The dragon followed, matching his pace. "This is bad," David muttered. He turned and walked faster toward the outpost. The sound of tiny claws scratching on volcanic rock followed him. He glanced back and saw the hatchling stumbling after him, determined despite falling every few steps. David tried stopping several times during the walk back. Each time he moved, the dragon moved. Each time he stood still, it caught up and sat at his feet, looking up at him with those bright golden eyes. By the time he reached the outpost doors, the hatchling was exhausted but still following. David entered the airlock and the door sealed behind him. He looked through the transparent panel. The dragon sat outside, staring at the door. "Dr. Tanaka," David called through his communication device. "We have a situation." 20 minutes later, 3 researchers stood in the observation room, watching the small dragon through the cameras. It had not moved from the door. "You let him print on you," Dr. Tanaka said. Her voice was flat and disappointed. The first rule of xenobiology fieldwork: never be the first thing a hatchling sees. "I didn't plan this," David said. "The egg was alone. It hatched while I was examining it. The damage is done." Tanaka crossed her arms. Tesserine dragons bond for life. That creature thinks you're its parent now. Owen Banks, the security officer, leaned against the wall. "So we relocate it. Take it far from the outpost and leave it near adult dragons." "It will die," said Riss, the Tesserine liaison. The insectoid alien's translation device made clicking sounds before the words came through. A bonded hatchling separated from its chosen one cannot survive. It will refuse food. It will not accept another. David stared at the small dragon on the screen. It had curled into a ball, but its eyes remained fixed on the door. "There must be something we can do," he said. "Yes," Riss replied. "Accept the bond or watch it die. There is no middle path." Tanaka shook her head. "Absolutely not. We cannot allow personnel to form attachments with apex predators. Those things grow to 12 feet tall. They breathe fire. One mistake and people die. It's the size of a cat," David argued. "For now," Tanaka said. "In 6 months, it will be large enough to kill you by accident. In a year, it could destroy this entire outpost if it becomes aggressive." Owen pushed off from the wall. "I'll handle the relocation. We'll sedate it and take it to the northern territories where the wild dragons nest." David felt something tight in his chest. He had only known this creature for a few hours, but the thought of it dying alone made him feel sick. "Give me one night," he said. "Let me research this properly. If there's no safe option, we'll do the relocation tomorrow." Tanaka studied his face for a long moment. "One night," It stays outside. Do not open that door. The researchers left. David remained in the observation room, watching the dragon. It had not moved. As evening came and the temperature dropped, he saw it shivering. David went to his quarters and tried to focus on research files. The database had records of only 3 human-dragon bonds in Tesseran history. All 3 had ended the same way. When the human died, the dragon died within days. When a dragon was killed, its bonded human fell into a decline that nothing could cure but a life bond. Permanent and absolute. His door chimed. Owen stood in the hallway holding a thermal blanket. Figured you might try to sneak this outside. Owen said, handing it over. The cameras have a blind spot on the east side of the airlock. I'll be in my quarters for the next hour, not watching anything. David took the blanket. Thanks. Don't make me regret this, Owen said and walked away. David used the blind spot. He opened the exterior door, just enough to toss the blanket out. The dragon lifted its head, sniffed the fabric, and crawled onto it. Within seconds, it was curled up and sleeping. When David returned to his quarters, he found he could not sleep at all. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those golden eyes staring at the door, waiting for him. David opened his quarters door at dawn and nearly stepped on the dragon. He sat in the hallway directly in front of his room, wrapped in a thermal blanket. Its tail was curled around its feet, and those golden eyes watched him without blinking. Someone had let it inside during the night. How did you get in here? David asked. The dragon chirped and stood up, shaking off the blanket. It pressed against his leg and looked up at him expectantly. David sighed and walked toward the mess hall. The dragon followed so closely that it kept bumping into his heels. Other researchers stopped to stare as they passed. Nobody said anything, but David could feel their judgment. In the mess hall, he got food from the dispenser and sat at an empty table. The dragon climbed onto the bench beside him and then onto the table itself. It sniffed his breakfast and chirped again. That's human food, David said. You need meat. He went back to the dispenser and requested a protein ration. The dragon ignored it completely when he placed it in front of the creature. Instead, it watched David eat his own meal with intense focus. Doctor. Tanaka sat down across from him without asking. That creature spent the entire night at your door. Owen found it scratching to get in around midnight. He made a command decision. I'll talk to him, David said. Don't bother. I approved it. Tanaka gestured to the dragon. If we're going to study this bond, we need it to survive long enough to collect data. It wasn't eating. Now we can at least monitor it properly. The dragon ignored them both and continued staring at David's food. It won't eat, David said. I've tried 3 different proteins. Try hand feeding it, Tanaka suggested. Some species won't accept food unless it comes from their bonded partner. David picked up a piece of the protein ration. The dragon's eyes tracked his movement. He held it out, and the creature gently took it from his fingers, swallowed, and chirped for more. Great, David muttered. Now I have to hand feed a dragon. Over the next hour, he fed it the entire protein ration piece by piece. Other researchers came and went, all of them watching the unusual pair. Riss arrived with another Tesseran, an older one with darker shell patterns. This is Elder Voss, Riss said. He knows much about dragon bonds. The elder approached slowly, studying the dragon with multifaceted eyes. He spoke in the Tesseran language, waiting for his translator to process the words. The bond is forming, Voss said. See how it mirrors his posture, how it breathes when he breathes. This is the first stage. Can it be broken? Tanaka asked. No, Voss replied simply. The question is not whether the bond exists. The question is whether the human accepts it. David looked down at the dragon. It had finished eating and was now curled up on the bench beside him, its head resting on his thigh. What happens if I accept? David asked. You become responsible for its life and it for yours, Voss said. When you are in danger, it will protect you even unto death. When it is threatened, you will feel compelled to defend it. The bond grows stronger each day until your emotions become shared. And if I don't accept, we relocate it and it dies within a week. Perhaps less. Voss tilted his head. I have seen 3 bonded pairs in my lifetime. Two were Tesseran dragon bonds. One was a human like you, many years ago, a scientist named Rebecca who studied volcanic patterns. What happened to her? David asked. She lived 43 more years with her dragon. They died on the same day, both of old age, both content. Voss touched the dragon's head gently with one claw. The bond is not a curse. It is a choice. But once you choose, you cannot unchoose. Tanaka stood up. David, I need you to think about this carefully. This is your entire life we're discussing. Every assignment, every decision, every plan you make will include this creature. Are you ready for that? David had spent the whole night thinking about exactly that. He had imagined his career, his future, all the places he might go. And then he had imagined this small dragon dying alone because he was too afraid to commit. I need to know more, he said finally, about the bond, about what it means. Then you have until tomorrow, Tanaka said. But that creature isn't leaving your side until you decide. Look, David glanced under the table. The dragon had moved from the bench and was now curled completely around his feet, its warm body making a circle that enclosed both his boots. It was fast asleep. He tried to move his foot. The dragon's eyes opened instantly, and it chittered in distress. It has chosen its home, Voss said quietly. Your feet are its territory now. This is the sign. The bond is sealed from its side. Only your acceptance remains. David spent the rest of the day in the research library with a dragon attached to his feet. He could walk if he shuffled slowly, and the creature would wake up and follow. But the moment he stopped moving, it would curl up on his boots again. He read everything available about dragon bonds. The physiology, the psychology, the practical implications. Dragons lived about 60 years on average. They were intelligent, capable of learning complex commands. They formed emotional connections not just with their bonded partner, but with that partner's community. They were also fiercely protective and grew to enormous sizes. By lunch, David had made his decision. The dragon was still sleeping on his feet under the library desk. Trusting him completely, he activated his communication device. Dr. Tanaka, he said, I need to register a formal bond with Tesseran authorities. There was a long pause. Are you absolutely certain? Tanaka asked. David looked down at the small dragon. It had woken at the sound of his voice and was watching him with those golden eyes that had followed him since the moment it hatched. Yes, David said. I'm certain. The dragon chirped softly and went back to sleep on his feet, finally home. The bonding ceremony took place in the outpost's main hall 3 days after David's decision. Riss had arranged everything according to Tesseran tradition, which meant the floor was covered in volcanic sand and the lights were dimmed to simulate twilight. Elder Voss stood at the center of the circle, his shell decorated with ceremonial paint. David knelt across from him with the dragon sitting calmly in his lap. The creature had grown noticeably in just those few days, now the size of a large house cat. What name have you chosen? Voss asked in Tesseran, the translator converting his words. Ash, David replied. Because of where I found him. Voss nodded approvingly. Ash, born of fire, bonded to David, born of earth. Let the joining be witnessed. The ceremony was simple. Voss spoke words in ancient Tesseran that the translator couldn't process. He marked David's forehead with red clay and touched Ash's scales with the same substance. Then he joined their hands together, David's palm against Ash's small clawed foot. David felt something shift in his chest. It was like a door opening that he hadn't known was closed. Suddenly, he could sense Ash's emotions, contentment, security, belonging. The dragon looked up at him and chirped, and David understood it wasn't just a sound. It was communication, safe. Home. Together. The bond is complete, Voss declared. Let no one separate what fire has joined. The watching researchers applauded politely. Dr. Tanaka stood to the side with her tablet, recording everything. Owen gave David a small nod that might have been approval or resignation. After the ceremony, Riss approached with a thick document reader. You must understand the legal implications, Riss said. On Tessera, bonded pairs have special status. You cannot be assigned to missions without Ash. He cannot be removed from your custody. If either of you commits a crime, both are held responsible. What about when he grows larger? David asked. The outpost isn't designed for a 12-foot dragon. That is your problem to solve, Riss said, but not unkindly. Most bonded pairs build homes in the volcanic regions where dragons are comfortable. You have time to plan. David signed the documents. With each signature, he felt the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just a pet or a research subject. This was a permanent partner for the rest of his life. Ash seemed to sense his anxiety. The dragon climbed from his lap to his shoulder and pressed a warm snout against David's cheek. The gesture was so clearly affectionate that David couldn't help but smile. "We'll figure out," he said quietly. The first week of official bonding was challenging. Ash refused to let David out of sight. When David worked in the lab, Ash sat on the counter and watched. When David showered, Ash waited outside the door and cried until he emerged. At night, Ash slept curled around David's feet under the blankets, generating so much heat that David had to turn off his room's climate control. But there were surprising benefits too. Ash learned quickly. Within days, he understood basic commands. Seat, stay, cool me. He could open doors by himself using his claws. He recognized different researchers by sight and smell and responded differently to each one. Playful with Owen, cautious around Tanaka, friendly toward Riss. The real revelation came during David's field work. 2 weeks after the ceremony, David returned to the thermal vents to collect samples. Ash followed close behind, no longer stumbling but moving with confident grace. His wings had grown stronger, and he could glide short distances. David knelt to examine a mineral deposit when Ash suddenly hissed and jumped between him and the rocks. The dragon scales bristled and smoke curled from his nostrils. "What's wrong?" David asked. Ash didn't move. David carefully looked around the rocks and saw it. A crystal scorpion, its translucent body nearly invisible against the volcanic glass. The creature's tail was raised, dripping with venom that could paralyze a human in seconds. Ash launched himself at the scorpion before David could react. The fight was brief and brutal. The dragon's claws were sharper than they looked, and his small jaws were powerful. Within moments, the scorpion was dead, and Ash was back at David's feet, looking up at him with what could only be described as pride. David's hands were shaking. He hadn't even seen the scorpion until Ash had reacted. The dragon had saved his life. "Good boy," David said, his voice rough. "Very good boy." Ash chirped and pressed against his legs, accepting the praise. That evening, David found Dr. Tanaka in her office reviewing data. "The bond isn't just emotional," he said, sitting down without invitation. "Ash can sense danger before I can. His reaction time saved me from a crystal scorpion today." Tanaka looked up from her tablet. "I've been documenting similar observations. Your heart rate synchronizes when you're together. Your stress levels drop when he's near. And there's something else." She turned her tablet to show him brain scans. "These are your neural patterns from 3 weeks ago," she said, pointing to the first image. "And these are from yesterday. See these new pathways? They weren't there before the bond." David studied the scans. Bright lines connected areas of his brain that should have been separate. "What does it mean?" he asked. "I don't know yet," Tanaka admitted. "But the bond is changing your brain structure, creating new connections. It's possible you're developing a form of shared consciousness with Ash. Not telepathy exactly, but something close." David thought about how he could sense Ash's emotions, how he sometimes knew what the dragon wanted before any physical signal was given. "Is it dangerous?" he asked. "Unknown," Tanaka said. "You're only the 4th human to ever bond with a Tesserine dragon. The data is limited, but so far, all signs point to a symbiotic relationship. You're adapting to each other on a neurological level." David returned to his quarters and found Ash waiting at the door. The dragon had grown again. He now reached David's knees when standing on all 4 legs. "We're changing each other," David said, kneeling down. "Is that okay with you?" Ash responded by climbing into his lap and rumbling deep in his chest. It was almost like a cat's purr, but with more heat. David wrapped his arms around the dragon and felt that same sense of rightness he'd experienced during the ceremony. Whatever they were becoming together, it felt natural. It felt like home. 6 weeks after the bonding ceremony, Ash was the size of a large dog and still growing. David had moved into larger quarters on the ground floor, where Ash had room to stretch his wings. The dragon still slept on his feet every night, though now those feet were buried under 60 pounds of warm scales and muscle. David sat at his desk reviewing geological surveys when he felt a pulse of curiosity from Ash. The dragon was investigating a puzzle box that Owen had brought as a gift. Ash pushed it with his snout, turned it with his claws, and within minutes had figured out how to open the compartments. "You're too smart for your own good," David said. Ash looked up and made a sound that had become familiar, a low rumble that meant agreement. David still couldn't understand words, but emotions and intentions came through clearly now. The neural pathways Tanaka had identified were growing stronger. His communication device chimed. Owen's voice came through. "We've got a situation in Section 7. Some equipment is malfunctioning. Could use your expertise with the thermal systems." "On my way," David replied. Ash was already at the door before David stood up. The dragon had learned to anticipate his movements. They walked through the outpost together, researchers stepping aside to let them pass. Most people had grown used to seeing them together, though newcomers still stared. Section 7 housed the geothermal generators that powered the outpost. David found Owen standing near a control panel that was displaying error codes. "Temperature sensors are going crazy," Owen said. "Reading spikes that shouldn't be possible, but the backup systems aren't showing anything unusual." David checked the readings. Owen was right. The primary sensors showed dangerous heat levels while the secondary sensors showed normal ranges. Ash suddenly pushed between them and the panel. The dragon scale stood on end and he growled, a sound David had never heard from him before. "What's wrong?" David asked, putting his hand on Ash's head, but a wave of alarm hit him through the bond. "Danger. Wrong. Bad. Back up," David said urgently. "Something's wrong." They had barely moved when the control panel exploded in a shower of sparks. Fire burst from a junction box behind it. Owen grabbed an extinguisher, but Ash was faster. The dragon reared up and breathed a stream of superheated air that consumed the oxygen around the flames. The fire went out instantly. David stared. "When did you learn to do that?" Ash looked pleased with himself. Pride radiated through the bond. Owen examined the burn panel. The primary sensors weren't malfunctioning. They were reading correctly. There's a plasma leak in the wall. If we hadn't caught it, the whole section could have exploded. Ash knew, David said. He sensed it before the equipment did. "Dragons can detect heat signatures invisible to technology," came Tanaka's voice. She had arrived with a repair team. Ash probably felt the plasma building up through the wall. She knelt beside the dragon. "May I scan him?" Ash looked at David, who nodded. "It's okay. She's trying to help." The dragon allowed Tanaka to run her scanner over his scales. She studied the results with growing interest. "His sensory organs are far more advanced than we realized," she said. "He can detect temperature variations of less than 1 degree from 20 meters away. And look at this. His scales contain crystalline structures that may allow him to sense electromagnetic fields." "Meaning what?" Owen asked. "Meaning he's not just a companion. He's a living sensor array." Tanaka looked at David. With training, he could detect equipment failures, geological instabilities, even medical emergencies by sensing body temperature changes. David felt a flutter of anxiety from Ash. The dragon pressed against his legs, uncomfortable with all the attention. "He's not a tool," David said firmly. "He's my partner." "I know that," Tanaka said, "but partnerships go both ways. He protects you. Maybe he can help protect all of us." Over the next 2 weeks, David worked with Ash to develop the dragon's natural abilities. They discovered Ash could identify which researchers were sick before symptoms appeared. He could locate thermal leaks in the outpost systems. He could even predict seismic activity hours before the instruments registered anything. Other researchers started seeking Ash's presence during fieldwork. The dragon's ability to sense danger made everyone safer. But Ash would only work with David present. The bond was absolute. Elder Voss visited again to observe their progress. "This is unusual," the elder said, watching Ash detect a failing power coupling from across the room. "Most bonded dragons are protective, yes, but your Ash has become a guardian for your entire community. Is that because of David? Rhys asked. Perhaps, Voss replied. Humans form different bonds than Tesserants. Your species sees community where we see individuals. Ash has learned this from David. He protects not just his bonded partner, but all who David cares about. David felt a swell of emotion from Ash. Not pride this time, but something deeper. Purpose. You understand, don't you? David said quietly to the dragon. This is your job now, keeping everyone safe. Ash rumbled his agreement and pressed his snout into David's hand. That night, David sat in his quarters writing a report when he felt Ash suddenly stand up from his position on David's feet. The dragon walked to the window and stared out at the volcanic landscape. Unease flowed through the bond. Then concern, then alarm. What is it? David asked, joining him at the window. That Ash's scales began to glow faintly, heat rising from his body. He pawed at the window and made a high-pitched sound David had never heard before, warning. Danger. Soon, David activated his communication device. This is Walsh. I think we have an incoming seismic event. Ash is detecting something. Instruments show nothing, came the response from the monitoring station. Trust me on this, David said. Sound the alert. There was hesitation, then Tanaka's voice came through. Do it. Sound the alert. Everyone to emergency stations. The outpost's alarm began to wail. Researchers emerged from their quarters, confused but moving to designated safe zones. David stayed at the window with Ash, his hand on the dragon's back, feeling the tremors of anxiety running through his partner. 3 minutes later, the ground began to shake. Ash had been right. The first quake was gentle, barely enough to rattle the windows. The second one, 30 seconds later, knocked equipment off tables. The third one cracked the floor. Evacuate. Tanaka's voice came through every speaker in the outpost. All personnel to the landing pad. This is not a drill. David grabbed his emergency pack and ran for the door with Ash beside him. The hallways were full of researchers moving quickly but not panicking. They had trained for this. Outside, the sky had turned orange. Mount Tessera, the massive volcano 15 kilometers away, was erupting. Rivers of lava poured down its sides, and ash was beginning to fall like black snow. The evacuation shuttles sat on the landing pad, engines warming up. Owen stood at the base of the nearest one, checking off names on his tablet as people boarded. Walsh, get on shuttle 2, Owen called out. David started toward it when Ash suddenly stopped walking. The dragon's attention was fixed on the eastern perimeter of the outpost. Fear. Pain. Trap. Someone's out there, David said. Ash senses them. Owen checked his tablet. Everyone's accounted for. Not our people, David said. Tesserants. The research camp on the east side. Rhys appeared from Shuttle 3. The Tesserant camp. 3 researchers were studying crystallization patterns. They should have returned hours ago. Another quake hit, stronger than the others. One of the outpost's support structures collapsed. We need to leave now, Owen said. The ash cloud is spreading. David looked at the eastern horizon. The Tesserant camp was 3 kilometers away through rocky terrain. The ash fall was getting heavier. Nobody would survive out there without protection. Ash pushed against his legs. Want to go? Need to help. I'm going after them, David said. That's suicide, Owen replied. You'll never make it back in time. Ash, it can navigate through the ash. He can sense heat signatures. We can find them. Tanaka appeared at Owen's side. David, I can't let you do this. You're not letting me do anything, David said. I'm making a choice. Get everyone else to safety. We'll meet you at the emergency shelter in the northern valley. He ran before anyone could stop him. Ash spread his wings and glided ahead, circling back to make sure David followed. The dragon had grown large enough now that his wingspan was impressive, nearly 3 meters across. The ash fall intensified as they left the outpost behind. David pulled his respirator mask on and activated the thermal tracker in his suit. But he didn't need it. Ash was pulling him forward through the bond, showing him the safe path, left, around the hot spot, over the rocks, faster. They moved through the darkening landscape like partners in a dance. David's feet found purchase where Ash indicated. He avoided weak ground that the dragon sensed would collapse. The bond had grown so strong that they operated as a single unit. The Tesseran research camp appeared through the ash cloud. One of the temporary structures had collapsed. David could hear clicking sounds, Tesseran's speech in distress. Ash led him to a pile of fallen equipment and structural panels. 3 Tesseran researchers were trapped underneath, one of them clearly injured. Their environmental suits were damaged, and ash was getting into their breathing filters. "I'm here to help," David said, activating his translator. "Can you move?" "The weight is too much," one of them replied. "We tried. Our communication devices were crushed. We could not call for aid." David examined the debris. It would take mechanical equipment to lift the panels safely. Equipment he didn't have. Then Ash stepped forward. The dragon had continued growing over the past weeks. He was now nearly as large as David, with muscles rippling under his crimson scales. The dragon positioned himself under the largest panel and pushed upward. His legs trembled with the effort, but the panel began to rise. "Go," David said to the Tesserans. "Move while he's lifting." 2 of them scrambled free. The third couldn't walk. Her leg was broken. David grabbed her and pulled her clear just as Ash's strength gave out and the panel crashed back down. Another massive quake struck. The ground split open 50 meters away, and lava began bubbling up through the crack. "We need to move now," David said. "Can any of you walk?" "I can carry Sella," one of the Tesserans said, lifting the injured one onto his back. They ran. The ash was so thick now that David could barely see 3 meters ahead. Lava flows were cutting off their original path. The temperature was rising to dangerous levels even through his protective suit. Ash took the lead, his natural resistance to heat allowing him to sense safe routes. But even the dragon was struggling now. David felt exhaustion pouring through the bond. "Keep going." "Almost there." Together, David sent encouragement back through the bond. "We can do this. I'm with you." The Northern Valley shelter appeared like a blessing through the ash cloud. It was a reinforced bunker built into the rock face, designed to withstand volcanic events. The door was open, and Owen stood in the entrance with a rescue team. "Come on," he shouted. They stumbled into the shelter. The Tesserans collapsed immediately. Medical personnel rushed to help them. David fell against the wall, his lungs burning despite the respirator. Ash collapsed beside him, sides heaving. The dragon's scales were covered in ash, and his wings were singed at the edges. "You did it," David said, pulling off his respirator to breathe the shelter's filtered air. "You saved them." Pride and relief flowed through the bond, mixed with exhaustion. Tanaka appeared with a medical scanner. "Let me check you both." "Check them first," David said, gesturing to the Tesserans. "We're fine." But they checked everyone. The Tesserans would recover. Sella's leg would heal. They had all survived because of a dragon who had learned to care about more than just his bonded partner. Elder Voss emerged from the crowd of evacuees. He approached David and Ash with slow, reverent movements. "What you did was remarkable," Voss said. "You risked your life for my people." Ash knew they needed help, David replied. "I just followed him." Voss looked at the dragon with multifaceted eyes. "The bond has made you both greater than you were alone. This is its true purpose." Outside, the volcano continued to rage. But inside the shelter, surrounded by people they had saved, David and Ash rested together. Safe. Together. Home. The rescue teams found them 3 days later. The volcanic eruption had finally stopped, and the ash clouds were clearing. The evacuation shuttles landed near the emergency shelter and began transporting people back to the outpost, or what was left of it. David stood outside the shelter watching the sunrise paint the volcanic landscape in shades of red and gold. Ash sat beside him, now almost completely grown. The dragon's head reached David's shoulder when sitting, and his wingspan could cover both of them in shade. "The outpost is damaged but reparable," Tanaka said, joining them. "We'll be operational again in a few weeks." "That's good," David replied. "The Galactic Council wants to speak with you," Tanaka continued. News of the rescue spread. A human and his bonded dragon saving Tesseran researchers during a volcanic eruption. It's gotten attention. David felt a flutter of nervousness through the bond. Ash didn't like attention. "What do they want?" he asked. "To understand the bond. To learn if it can be replicated." Tanaka paused. They're offering you a position at the Xenobiology Institute on Nexus Station. Full research facilities. A team dedicated to studying human-dragon partnerships. It was the kind of opportunity most scientists dreamed about. Prestigious, well-funded, career-defining. And what about Ash? David asked. Does this institute have space for a 12-foot dragon? They're prepared to accommodate him, Tanaka said. They understand you're a bonded pair. David looked at Ash. The dragon was watching a group of smaller volcanic creatures scurrying across the rocks. Content. Curious. At peace. What do you think? David asked him. Confusion came through the bond. Ash didn't understand the question. David tried to send the concept through their connection. New place. Different work. Many strangers. Ash responded immediately. Together. Always together. Place doesn't matter. David smiled. When do they need an answer? Soon, Tanaka said. But there's something else you should know. We've had 23 applications from other researchers wanting to attempt dragon bonding. The success of your partnership has inspired others. That's concerning, David said. Most of them won't survive the bond. The odds are terrible, which is why we need someone to teach them properly, to establish protocols, to make it safer. Tanaka looked at him seriously. That could be you, David. You could help create a whole new field of interspecies cooperation. David thought about that tiny hatchling following him across volcanic rocks, refusing to leave his side. He thought about the ceremony, the growth, the rescue. Every step had taught him something about the bond. I'll consider the institute position, he said finally. But I need to see the facilities first. Make sure they're right for both of us. Tanaka nodded. I'll arrange a visit. Over the next few weeks, the outpost slowly returned to normal. Repairs were made. Research resumed. But something had changed. David noticed researchers treating Ash differently now, with respect rather than curiosity. The dragon had proven himself as more than just an interesting specimen. Owen brought a package to David's quarters one evening. This came for you from the Tesserand Council. David opened it and found a beautifully crafted collar made of volcanic glass and precious metals. A note was attached in Tesserand script. For Ash, guardian of the two peoples. With gratitude from those he saved. Ash sniffed the collar and allowed David to fasten it around his neck. The dragon looked at his reflection in the window and rumbled with approval. Rhys visited the next day with Elder Voss. We have a proposal, Voss said. The Tesserand government wishes to establish a formal program for human-dragon bonding. We would like you to lead it. I thought the Galactic Institute wanted me, David said. They do, Rhys replied. But we offer something different. You would work here, on Tessara, helping to build bridges between our peoples, training others, studying the bond in its natural environment. And we would build you a proper home, Voss added, in the volcanic highlands where Ash will be comfortable as he reaches full size, where both of you can thrive. David felt a surge of interest from Ash. The dragon liked that idea. Open sky, warm rocks, space to fly. Can I think about it? David asked. Of course, Voss said. The choice must be right for both of you. That night, David sat on his bed with his tablet, reviewing both offers. The Galactic Institute represented prestige and resources. The Tesserand program offered purpose and belonging. Ash climbed onto the bed and rested his massive head on David's lap. The dragon was fully grown now, magnificent and powerful. But in this moment, he was just the same creature who had curled around David's feet that first day in the mess hall. David stroked the crimson scales, feeling the warmth radiating from them. Where do you want to be? He asked. Images flooded through the bond. Not words, but feelings and visions. Open volcanic plains. Other dragons flying overhead. David working in a lab built into rock. Young humans learning to bond. Communities of different species living together. Home, David understood. Ash didn't want to leave Tessara. This harsh, beautiful volcanic world was where he belonged. And through the bond, it was where David belonged too. He sent his decision to both the Institute and the Tesserand Council the next morning. The Institute was disappointed, but understanding. The Council was delighted. 6 months later, David stood outside the new Human-Dragon Bond Research Center in the Volcanic Highlands. The facility was built into the mountain itself, with large open spaces for dragons and comfortable living quarters for humans. 5 bonded pairs had already formed, each one unique, but all following the pattern David and Ash had established. Ash lounged on a warm rock nearby, watching David work with a new researcher and her young dragon. The hatchling was having trouble understanding commands. "Patience," David advised. "The bond takes time. Let it develop naturally." The young dragon suddenly chirped and ran to curl around its bonded human's feet. The researcher laughed with delight. David smiled. He had seen that exact behavior before. As evening fell, he walked to the edge of the facility's platform and looked out over the volcanic landscape. Ash joined him, pressing his warm side against David's body. "Do you ever think about that day?" David asked. "When I found your egg?" Contentment flowed through the bond. Gratitude. Love. "Me too," David said. They stood together as the sun set, casting long shadows across the rocks. A human and a dragon. A scientist and a guardian. Partners chosen by chance, but bonded by choice. Below them, in the facility, other bonded pairs were beginning their own journeys. Each unique, each precious, each proving that the strongest bonds aren't formed by biology or programming, but by the simple decision to trust another being completely. Ash rumbled deep in his chest, the sound of absolute peace. David rested his hand on the dragon's scales and felt the same peace echo through the bond. This was home. Not a place on his feet anymore, but something bigger. A life built together. A purpose shared. A future full of possibility. And it had all started because a tiny dragon hatchling had followed him one morning and decided, by lunch, that his feet were the only home worth having.